Chapter 6. We were free. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The two men stood in the middle of the road as we drove away. They were both screaming obscenities, at us and at each other. I watched them until the dirt road dipped, then curved, and the only thing visible through the back windshield was the endless hills. I drew in a ragged breath and collapsed against the back seat, fumbling for a seatbelt. My hands shook violently as I tried to make sense of the tangled belts and receivers. Nobody ever rode in the back seat. And now I remembered why. Where seatbelts should have been, I found one empty metal receiver and a broken lap belt instead. I stopped pawing for a seatbelt, realizing for the first time that one of my fingernails was throbbing. It had been partially torn off. In the dark, it looked like a broken seashell, clinging to my pointer finger by a thread. For a second, I thought I might throw up. I stopped looking at it and sat back in the seat, careful not to let the back of my head rest against the dirty fabric. My scalp hummed with a hot, prickly ache. "Liv, are you okay? Do you still have my phone?" Laura asked from the front seat, her voice stretched and uneven. She brushed at her right arm violently as she clutched the wheel and moved her head back and forth, trying to see out of the smashed windshield as she drove. "Do you still have the phone?" she asked again. She leaned closer to the steering wheel and tilted her head to see through another pocket of unbroken glass as the road curved. I dropped it when he grabbed me." The last word came out as a whisper. I couldn't believe what had just happened. "I'll find it," I added quickly, careful not to look at my finger as I scrambled over the glove compartment's exposed hole and back into the passenger seat. I clicked the semi-functional seatbelt into place, then started feeling around on the floorboards. "Are you okay?" Laura asked again, her voice nearly lost in the wind rushing through the open window. "When he had you by the hair, I thought—" She trailed off. I blinked back at the tears that suddenly prickled behind my eyes, unwilling to let myself feel the full horror of the situation. I needed that phone. "I'm okay," I managed. "Are you?" When I glanced up at her, I saw a trolley of deep scratches running from her bare shoulder to her elbow. They looked angry and bloody, even in the dim light. She grimaced as we hit a pothole in the dirt road head-on. "I'm fine, but I can barely see through the windshield." She unclipped her seatbelt, tucking one leg underneath her and leaning forward in the driver's seat so that her face was nearer to the windshield, and one of the small, clear patches among the glass webbing. "There, that's better." She hit the gas harder, and the Volvo flew faster down the dirt road. We were still miles from civilization, but we were headed in the right direction. "Do you hate me?" she asked after a moment. "Why would I hate you?" I asked incredulously, pausing my search for the phone to glance behind us, scanning the shadowy hills for any sign of approaching headlights. There was nothing. "I dragged you out here tonight even though you had to work, and then I didn't listen to you. You knew something was wrong and I kept telling you everything was fine." I shook my head. "No, I have to be dragged everywhere, and I always think something is wrong. You know that." "But this time, you were right," she choked. "What if they'd gotten us out of the car?" "They didn't," I said firmly. Those words sent a shudder of relief through me. "They didn't," I repeated. "That's all that matters." I kept rummaging along the floorboard, feeling for the outline of the flip phone, until I heard Laura whisper, "Shit." I sat up and whipped around to look behind us. Just before we rounded a curve, I caught a glimpse of headlights. Chapter 7. "Maybe it's not them," Laura stammered. It could be—" She trailed off. It was them. The tires crunched on the road through the open window. In a matter of seconds, the truck's brights filled our rearview mirror. "Hurry, find the phone," Laura begged. "I'm going as fast as I can, but I don't want to overshoot a turn." My fingers felt a rectangular edge on the floorboards. I seized it, only to realize it was a tape deck, not the phone. "We just have to make it to the paved road. Then it's only a few more miles until we get service, right?" she said in a rush. "Do you remember where we were when you sent that text to Tish?" I shook my head miserably. wishing I thought to look for a landmark when I saw that last flickering bar of service. I don't know. The Volvo picked up speed as we moved downhill into a straightaway. She took the next curve witut braking, which pushed my shoulder hard against the base of the gear shift. A metallic thud sounded next to my feet, and I quickly reached down to grab hold of the phone that had thunked against the console. Got it, I said hoarsely, trying to calm my shaking hands, trying to focus. The brights behind us blazed into full view, and Laura floored the gas again. Keep redialing, she prompted, shifting the Volvo into second gear. The phone's dim screen lit up as I opened the flip phone and redialed 911. The number blinked on the screen as the cells searched for a signal. Then, like before, the call failed. I tried again and again. This time the call would connect. Dispatch would answer. Someone would find us and help us. I rehearsed what I would say when they answered. When? Call failed. Call failed. Call failed. Battery low. I clutched the seatbelt and set the phone on my lap as Laura took another turn. My head hurt and my stomach was roiling again. Gingerly, I reached up to touch my disheveled hair and felt something slick and raw beneath it. I wiped my hand against the side of my halter top, watching the sequins turn dark with my blood. Laura began to cry as the truck blinked its brights on and off in that maniacal Morse code. It nosed closer. Her soft, snuffling tears grew into loud, hysterical sobs, but her hand stayed glued to the steering wheel. Her gaze flicked steadily back and forth between the road and the rearview mirror. My throat tightened as I heard the steady roar of the truck's engine behind us, its flashing brights filling up our mirrors. The turnoff to the paved road suddenly appeared in our headlights. Okay, we've made it this far. Now if we can just get back to... Laura choked out. The truck stayed right behind us, slowing down just enough to take the turn onto the paved road in pursuit without flying over the edge on the other side. The paved straightaway that stretched out before us was long compared to the meandering curves of the dirt road. I clenched one hand around the seatbelt at my waist. Would we make it to one more switchback, let alone to the point where we'd have cell reception again? I brought the phone back to my ear, dialing and redialing, watching the dark road for any sign of another car. The headlights closed in quickly, even though we had picked up speed so that the air rushing inside the passenger window drowned out everything but the engine's drone and the down notes of Laura's sobs. The Volvo suddenly rattled hard. Was something falling apart? The bumper? Part of the undercarriage? The engine itself? I couldn't see the speedometer, but I was certain that nobody had ever gone this fast in the Volvo for a very long time. The ancient car maxed out at 55 on a good day, and we were going much faster than that on the downhill now. The car shuddered so hard that my seatbelt caught. I jolted forward. The men in the truck had hit us from behind. Before I could process what had happened, they hit us again, more forcefully this time. The pathetic boombox tumbled against my leg and clattered to the floorboards. The sound of metal colliding with metal punctuated the rush of air outside the car. What the hell are we supposed to do now? Laura choked out. The truck backed off slightly, then gunned its engine again and barreled toward us. She shot me a panicked look, as if I really might know the answer. My brain spun through every worst-case scenario I'd ever imagined. Nothing like this had ever crossed my mind as something I might need to prepare for. I had absolutely no idea what to do next. Laura drew her shoulders up, bracing for impact. I grabbed hold of the window frame and planted my feet against the floorboards. Just keep going, I screamed over the wind. No matter what, keep going. The truck was a beast, but the Volvo was a tank. As long as the wheels didn't come off, it would keep us safe. As I braced for the next hit, something in the distance made me forget about the blood in my hair and the failed signal message on Laura's phone. More headlights. Chapter 8. The truck didn't ram us again. The driver must have seen the approaching headlights too. He fell back to a safe following distance and turned off the truck's brights, looking just like any other vehicle on the road. A knot of determination grew out of the fear churning in my stomach. We had to get the other car's attention, let them know we needed help. How do I turn on the Volvo's hazards? I barked, trying to find the little orange triangle on the console. They don't work, Laura wailed, flashing her brights erratically. Then slow down, roll down your window, hurry! My voice was hoarse. Then, I swallowed, getting ready to scream as loudly as I could. Laura was already rolling down her window and screaming. flashing the brights again and again while she waved her arm wildly, even though the oncoming vehicle was still several car lengths away. The Volvo weaved dangerously on the road, while Laura struggled to keep the car in position, poking her head out of the window to see instead of peering through the shattered windshield. Leaning as far as I could next to her on the driver's side, I cleared my throat and tried to make my voice carry over the wind too. "Help! We need help!" I made out the silhouette of the lone driver in a white Suburban as it drew closer. Time seemed to expand as our vehicles approached one another, and Laura leaned farther out of the window, causing the Volvo to wobble violently in our lane. For a moment, before Laura could correct our path, we veered over the center line toward the Suburban. I felt, more than saw, the other driver's eyes rest on us and on the shitty Volvo weaving out of its lane. His attention was on us, not on the truck that had fallen back a significant distance behind us. My stomach sank. "Help us!" I screamed again, at his closed driver's side window, willing him to look at the broken windshield to understand that something awful had happened, that something worse would happen if he didn't intervene. The driver was an older man, with a short gray beard and bushy eyebrows. His mouth was turned down in a deep frown. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he shook his head in disgust. Then, raising his middle finger, he was gone. Laura left her arm hanging limply over the edge of the driver's side door for a few seconds before she slowly pulled it back inside and rolled up the window. Tucking her leg beneath her once more and leaning forward so that she could see through the windshield, I twisted around in my seat and stared through the back windshield, my hand at my throat. The white Suburban passed the truck without slowing down, its red taillights disappearing around the bend. I imagined the driver, still indignant, still shaking his head. Drunk kids driving down the canyon at night, going to kill somebody. I watched with morbid expectancy as the truck flashed its brights at us and picked up speed again. "No," I whispered. Laura kept silent. The tears on her cheeks had dried in the wind. The sound of the truck's engine grew steadily louder. In no time, their front bumper was inches from our tailgate again. Laura slammed the gas, and for the next half a mile, we somehow stayed just ahead of them. If we could make it a few more miles, we'd get cell service back. I dialed 911 again and again, losing track of how many times I had heard the beeping message, "No service." I touched my hair again. Some of the blood was starting to dry against my scalp, but I could still feel a wet trickle down the back of my head. What else would Red Mask do if given the opportunity? I was pretty sure I already knew the answer to that question. I opened the glove box, then thrust my hand into the shallow storage area beneath the armrest, searching for anything sharp, anything we could use to arm ourselves. The boombox at my feet had worked once, but it was so heavy and unwieldy that I wasn't sure how useful it really was. I found a bottle of ibuprofen, a book, insurance papers, pens, everything and nothing. "We have to be close," Laura said desperately, flicking her gaze from the windshield to the cell phone pressed against my ear. "Just keep trying, Liv." We slowed down a little to take another sharp curve, skidding dangerously close to the drop-off. The truck veered sharply into the left lane alongside us. I kept the phone to my ear and concentrated, counting to 10 between each redial in an effort to save the remaining battery life. Laura floored the gas and edged in front of the truck. She wasn't about to let them pass us again. I held my breath, straining my eyes for any sign of headlights in the distance. In the center of the road, we were playing chicken with a head-on collision, but that idea wasn't nearly as scary as the possibility of letting them stop us again. If we could stay ahead of them a little longer, we'd get service back, and the call would finally connect. I gritted my teeth and redialed, listening for the beep above the wind rushing through the open window and the sound of the papers and wrappers in the backseat skittering like nervous animals. Instead of attempting to pass us again, the truck stayed even with our back tires. As we entered the next short straightaway, I brought the phone away from my ear to check on the battery of Laura's phone. 15%. I looked through the back windshield just in time to see the truck nose into the left lane, then swerve toward us, hitting the Volvo's back left bumper with a grating squeal and a dull thunk. We were already moving way too fast, barely in control, barely able to see through the webbed windshield. Laura gasped as the Volvo pulled hard toward the right side of the road, pumping the brakes and jerking the steering wheel to the left in a frantic attempt to correct the Volvo's forward path. Thunk. Another strike to the edge of the bumper. The rush of blackness outside my window seemed to fill the car as the truck veered toward us again, hitting our rear passenger side. My head whipped forward as I desperately tried to follow what was happening. The phone, still blinking no service in my hand, slipped out of my grasp once more and hit the dash with a crack. I braced for the next impact and tried to tug the seatbelt tighter. I could no longer see the grade of the hillside to our left. We'd overcorrected. My vision swam with dots. The gravel under our tires crunched out a warning that we were crossing onto the narrow shoulder. The tires scrambled for purchase on dirt as Laura tried to pull us back into the center of the lane. Her voice was thick and syrupy in my ears, like it came from underwater. "They're trying to run us off the road." The truck struck our rear fender this time, and the Volvo's back tires spun as Laura cranked the wheel again. Another blow. I suddenly remembered that Laura wasn't wearing a seatbelt anymore. Our front left tire dipped over the edge. The sharp edge of the boombox, then the light tap of the phone, clunked against my foot. I didn't reach down to grab it. Instead, I clung to a floppy seatbelt, afraid to move, afraid to look out of the window at the slope of the dark hillside, yawning much too close. "Laura," I gasped, "put on your seatbelt." Her eyes widened, and she let go of the wheel with one hand to reach for the seatbelt. Before she could click it into place, the truck hit us again. It was more of a nudge than a blow, a careful, almost gentle tap. A whiff of exhaust drifted through the window as the headlights backed away from the ledge, and then the Volvo began to slide downhill. Chapter 9. I'd braced for the car to flip end over end, like a scene from Mission Impossible. Instead, we slid a few feet, then stopped, when the tires sank into the soft dirt at the top of the grade. The Volvo made a metallic groaning noise. I twisted to unbuckle my seatbelt, and the tires slid another few inches. Laura gasped. I froze. Had I done that? The headlights behind us grew fainter as the truck pulled away, plunging us back into complete darkness aside from the Volvo's dim headlights, obscured by a tangle of feathery sagebrush smashed against the front grille of the car. "Move," I told my legs. "Do something," I screamed at my hands, willing them to unbuckle the seatbelt so I could hurl myself through the open passenger window. Anything seemed preferable to careening down the slope toward the murky valley in the foothills below, even taking our chances on the road. But I couldn't move. I could barely even breathe, terrified that any tiny movement would send the car sliding again. Laura met my gaze in horror. In one hand, she held her own detached seatbelt buckle. In the other, she held the driver's side door handle. Her eyes met mine, asking the same unanswerable question slamming through my brain. What now? At the end of Tish's senior year, Laura, Tish, and I had taken a road trip to Silverwood, a theme park in northern Idaho, a last hurrah until we joined her at college. Tish and Laura spent weeks mapping out the entire park, starting with Roller Coaster Alley. I spent weeks fretting about whether I would chicken out on the very first ride and asking Jeeves to investigate whether anybody had ever died at Silverwood. They hadn't, but there was always a first time. Tremors, a wooden roller coaster that arced above the highest treetops, was the first stop on the map. The wooden track was an enormous tangle of complicated joists and beams. Some of the wood on the support beams was splintering just a little. When was this thing built? How much did engineers know back then? I put on my best smile until the creaky metal bar came down across my lap, and the ride attendant, a thumb-popping kid with a greasy center part, walked back to the control deck. The lap bar was a full 6 inches above my waist. My hands slippery with sweat were not going to be able to hold on tight enough when I passed out. I knew with every cell in my body that I was going to fall out of the coaster cart. My body, caught in the momentum of the twisting coaster, would be smashed into the tracks. The jolt would derail the entire coaster. I would die, and so would everyone else. "Laura," I begged, not wanting Tish, who had agreed to ride solo in front of us, to hear me. I can't do this. I'm sorry, I can't. I shouldn't have come." She let go of the lap bar with one hand to link one arm through mine, anchoring me tight beside her. "I've got you, Liv," she said simply. The rickety coaster cart was already chugging up the first steep incline. My vision blurred. The life cereal I'd eaten for breakfast churned. Laura squeezed my arm, whispering something about fun. The gears pulled the line of faded sky blue coaster carts steadily up the first hill. With each tick of the chain, I watched the cars in the parking lot and the trees shrink. I darted my eyes across the track, trying to determine our path. All I could see was the dark tunnel at the bottom of the first hill, a tiny black mouth that disappeared underground. It looked way too small to accommodate the long line of coaster carts. I imagined myself flopping to the side of the cart, where my head would hit the edge of the tunnel and explode in a mess of brains. Laura squeezed my arm harder. The first coaster cart had crested the top of the slope and was hanging over the other side, inching forward while the back cars struggled to the top. Laura and I were in the middle, the tipping point. As soon as our car reached the slope, gravity would take over and pull the entire line of coaster cars down, down, down into the tunnel. Our car ticked to the top of the slope, and I let go of the bar for a split second to wipe my sweaty hands on my pants. I tore my eyes away from the impossibly tiny black mouth at the bottom of the slope to look at Laura. Her eyes were squeezed shut. "Don't let go, okay, Liv?" she whispered. It wasn't until that moment that I realized she was scared too. The surprise jolted me out of my panic just long enough that when the cars tipped forward and began their race down the first hill, I stopped thinking about my body getting ground into the track ties like hamburger. Instead, I locked my arm into Laura's as tight as she was holding on to me and squeezed back. That was the last time I rode a roller coaster. Laura and Tish rode the Panic Plunge, Stunt Pilot, Timber Terror, and Corkscrew together, while I stood in line for elephant ears and cotton candy. Neither of them teased me about being a chicken or a baby. We rode the Ferris wheel together at the end of the day, arms linked tight while the enclosed gondolas drifted above the park and the sun melted into the trees. "They've got me," I told myself when the flutters in my stomach turned to pinpricks of doubt over the structural integrity of the bolts holding our gondola in place. They've got me. Sometimes, in my nightmares, I still found myself balanced precariously at the very top of a rickety wooden track set to plunge into a tunnel. I always woke up, sweaty and breathing hard, before the coaster cart tipped.